Lovely. Hello, everyone. We're so excited you've joined us for Science for Young Citizens Urban Wildlife. We're just waiting for everyone to join us, and I believe we've got everyone gathered. Thank you for putting into the chat your current sightings of animals in your neighborhood and around Calgary. We're going to begin our program now. But before we actually officially start, we have an important message to share from Mayor Gondek.
Welcome to the 33rd Annual Mayor's Environment Expo. As we come together from around the city, I would like to acknowledge that the Calgary area, where the Bow and Elbow Rivers meet, is a place of confluence, where the sharing of ideas and opportunities naturally come together. Indigenous people were the original caretakers of this land and the first champions of environmental conservation. This land is a home that we all share, and it's vitally important that we protect our home, our environment, by working together. What drives my optimism is seeing the innovation and commitment to climate action from all of you, our students. I will continue to amplify youth voices on the climate crisis, and I look forward to hearing your ideas. I hope this session sparks conversations and encourages all of us to take greater action in protecting our environment. Thank you all for participating.
Wow, so inspiring and inclusive, just like nature. Grace, my friend, my partner, if you're all set, please, the stage is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sherry, and thank you, Mayor Gondek, for those very important words. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Science for Young Citizens Urban Wildlife. As Sherry said, my name is Grace, and I am very excited to be here with you today as your presenter. I work for an organization called Green Calgary, and we're an environmental charity right here in the city, which means that we care a lot about the health of our environment and all of the different things that we can do in order to live more sustainably. And this means that I get to go all over the city talking to different schools and communities and businesses about the ways that we can reduce the amount of waste that we create in our day-to-day lives, use less electricity and less water, and find other ways to just keep the nature in our own backyards like super healthy. And we aren't doing this alone. There are other wonderful organizations doing this work alongside us, including CPAWS. So I'm joined today in this presentation by Sherry from CPAWS, one of our partners for this awesome program. Sherry, do you want to take a quick moment to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you, Grace. My name, as you know now, is Sherry, and I work with Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society, Southern Alberta chapter. CPAWS, as we're known to our friends, is a coast-to-coast-to-coast environmental organization that seeks to stand up and represent and celebrate our beautiful wild places. And not just the trees and the bears. We're talking birds, butterflies, bacteria, and urban wildlife. So we're thrilled to be here partnering with Grace and Green Calgary, and look forward to seeing you on a hiking trail and in a classroom near you soon. Thanks, Grace.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sherry. And do we have any recent wildlife sightings that we can share from the chat? And if not, totally okay. Now we're getting warmed up. Sherry, do you have some wildlife sightings from yourself that you'd like to share with us?
Well, you know what, actually, Grace? We do. In the chat, I saw blue jay and squirrel.
Oh my goodness, amazing.
We are in good company. People are connecting, and urban wildlife sightings are happening.
Awesome. Just awesome. I know I saw an eastern gray squirrel on my lunch break fall out of a tree into a bush in my yard, which was super funny, but also those guys are just acrobats. They can jump all over the place. So amazing. Thank you everyone for your participation. There are going to be a couple of different opportunities to participate during today's presentation. So please feel free to use the Q&A. My moderator, Sherry, is going to be keeping an eye on your questions throughout, and we would love to have you sharing your answers as we're going through this presentation. So before I tell you more about citizen science. I first want to start off with practicing a few of our observational skills and introducing you to one of my favorite places, nature. So I have a picture for you here, and I would like you to tell me what you're seeing in this picture. What are the different things that you're observing? So if you could enter that into the chat right now, that would be just amazing. And while your answers are coming in, I want to give you a little bit more context for this photo. So it's a picture that I took in a city park exactly 2 weeks ago here in Calgary. And so this is a really good example of what it might be like to observe the nature that's in our urban spaces, that's right here in our own backyard. And the thing about our urban wildlife here is that their habitat might look a little bit different in the city than it might look if they were in a more remote area, say somewhere like Banff National Park or Kananaskis Country. You know, here in our cities, our wildlife are faced with many more obstacles. They have new sounds, they have more light, there are different barriers in their way, things like roads and buildings that our wildlife need to adapt to in order to be able to survive. So some common wildlife we may see here, maybe things like coyotes or hares or Canada geese, or maybe even the odd moose who wanders into one of our suburbs that's on the edge of the city. But Sherry, you know, I've been saying enough. In the meantime, do we have any observations that we can share from what we've been seeing? Awesome.
We do. Sky,
Yeah.
leaves. Somebody actually said beetles.
Oh my goodness.
And owls. Is that true?
Wow, actually, yes, really good observational skills. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating. This is amazing. So I was lucky enough 2 weeks ago, I was out on a birding trip with my mom, and we were able to spot these 2 great horned owls in the park, which was just awesome. A dad great horned owl with his owlet. And great horned owls, they are super cool because they can live right here in our cities. There are tons of things for them to be able to eat here, like squirrels or hares, and they can find big trees in our urban parks to be able to roost in and lay their eggs in the early spring. So super duper cool. And an observation like this could be an example of citizen science, the observations that you were already making in the chat. And I will tell you a little bit more about that in just a second. So I've been using these words a lot. What is citizen science? Well, simply put, citizen science is the idea that asking questions can make us all scientists, having this natural curiosity about the world. So what's happening right now is that scientists and researchers are creating projects where they're seeking to answer questions about the world around us, the ecosystems, the wildlife, our climate, and how the world around us is changing. And sometimes they need a little bit of help. So what they can do is they can reach out to citizens, everyday people like you and like me, and ask us for help with collecting information or data. This can be photos, this can be observations that we've made and write down, and then we can share that information with these scientists through new technologies, things like apps, like the internet, through our tablets and phones. So it's super cool. We're going to go through some examples today of how we can actually do citizen science using the tools that we have. And citizen science, it's super important. So this data that we collect, it's actually being used to increase our general scientific knowledge about the world around us, helping us to answer those big unknowns about the ecosystems and the wildlife and, you know, the climate, everything that we see in the world that surrounds us. And citizen science can actually help to solve real world problems. There are a couple of different ways that it can do this. Firstly, through that important research that I was telling you about, where researchers are taking all of this information, maybe they're someone like a conservation biologist, and then they can really focus on the research that they're doing to find out how we can better protect and support the wildlife that are around us and their habitats as well. This information can also be passed along to decision makers like our governments, the City of Calgary, who can then create important policies that will also help to protect our wildlife. So Citizen science, it is super cool, and it's something that you can absolutely participate in. And throughout this presentation, you're going to learn how to become a citizen scientist. So, who can be a citizen scientist? Well, if you were listening very carefully during the last slide, you will know that absolutely anyone can participate in citizen science. It can be you, me, your siblings, your neighbor, Sherry, your teacher, anybody can participate in citizen science. You do not need to have a degree in order to be part of it. You just need to have a healthy curiosity for the world around you. So today we're going to be talking about just that, how to become a citizen scientist and the different things you might need. You know, it might surprise you to find out that you probably already have a lot of the tools in order to participate in citizen science. You have your eyes for making observations. You can look at the world around you. Maybe you're noticing, you know, what does the sky look like on a given day? Maybe you've seen a new plant when you were out on a hike. And you also have your ears for listening. A lot of the time we will hear different wildlife species before we can see them. And a good example of this is birds. So many birds have different calls, and a great way to identify them is just by learning how to recognize what different birds sound like. And then we also have these fabulous new technologies. So citizen science, it's something that's been going on for hundreds of years. However, with the invention of the internet and other technologies like smartphones and tablets, we are able to participate in citizen science more than ever before. So super duper cool. And I'm going to introduce you to some of those cool technologies and apps in just a little bit here. However, before we get into that, I first want to talk about something else really important, the roots of citizen science, talking about Indigenous science. So citizen science, it actually isn't new. It's a practice that's been around for hundreds or even thousands of years, since humans started observing, had a curiosity, and wanted to record all of that information. And so what we're looking at right here is an example of that. What I would like you to do right now in the chat is to tell me, what are some of the things that you're seeing in this image? So if you want to take a moment to do that, that would be absolutely wonderful. So a little bit more information about what we're looking at here. This is what we call a winter count, which is a picture-based calendar that's made on an animal hide, which was used by Indigenous nations right here in North America. And what they would do is they would gather as a community, and they would decide what the most important events were that happened that year that they would like to record on the winter count. So this particular winter count was used by the Blackfoot people, and it was interpreted by an elder named Elder Bullplume and missionary Canon Haynes, where they found a number of really interesting events which happened on this winter count during the time where all of these observations were recorded by a community of people. So here are some of the events. 5 years into the winter count, they tell of berries staying on the trees for the entire winter. That was a strange observation to make. The winter count also had years where there was hail and thunder during the winter, and the deer and the buffalo got stuck in the deep snow. In other years, the buffalo and the antelope got sick following an eclipse, and strong winds were recorded as a significant event that happened. So you can tell by some of the things that I'm describing here that there's lots of information that we can take from Indigenous science that we're using even now today to learn more about historical weather patterns here in Canada, and importantly, how our climate is changing over time. Now, Sherry, do we have anything that we've been seeing in this winter count that we'd like to share?
Absolutely. I myself, every time I look at this slide, even though I've seen it a few times, I always see something new. Some observations that were put into the Q&A is animals with antlers, canoe, question mark, bison skull, and then drums. All amazing observations.
Absolutely. Definitely. We are seeing not just ecosystem features, things like animals and geography, but we're also seeing human behaviors that are being captured in this winter count as well. I have to apologize, everyone. If you're hearing a little bit of noise in the background, it's my cat, a little bit of not so wildlife, who is currently decided to be part of this presentation. So wonderful. Let's saunter on with our presentation on citizen science. So now, knowing what citizen science is and where it came from, I want to take a look at how we can actually conduct citizen science. So these are two projects here that are both apps that have been created to connect citizens with scientific research on wildlife. I'm sure that you've used an app before, and what I want you to do right now is to raise your hand if you've used an app, maybe on a computer, or on a tablet, or an iPhone. You know, I can't see you, but I can see Sherry raising her hand, and I can feel it. I can feel everyone in the room, almost everyone maybe, is raising their hand right now because of how much we use technology these days. So these apps right here, Calgary Captured and iNaturalist, they are no more complicated than the apps that you've been using before on your iPad or on your tablet. And, you know, they're super interesting ways to be able to connect with research that's being done on wildlife. So let me tell you a little bit more about them. Calgary Captured is a multi-year wildlife monitoring program. So it's a program that aims to increase our knowledge about urban wildlife and also to help our decision makers here, the city of Calgary, to manage wildlife that live right here in our city parks. So the city of Calgary actually did something really cool back in 2009. They declared their support for biodiversity conservation. And what that means is that they recognized the importance of biodiversity and of providing really important habitat and connecting habitat across the city for our wildlife to be able to live in. However, when they made this commitment, they recognized a really important data gap. They need to know where wildlife are. So this project, Calgary Captured, seeks to answer some of those really important questions. Firstly, what species are occurring in our parks right here in Calgary? We can explore as well how human activities and the presence of humans and our pets are impacting how wildlife move throughout our parks. And then also doing just a long-term study of these large terrestrial mammals and how they move throughout our city. So very cool project. The way that it works is that there are a number of motion activated cameras throughout the city placed in our parks just a little bit off the beaten path on our trails. And whenever they go off, they capture a picture of some wildlife that's in the park, or maybe a human, or maybe an off-leash dog. And then those images of wildlife then get uploaded to the Calgary Captured website, where you can look at them and help to identify the wildlife that you're seeing in pictures. So a very cool project. I'm going to give you a demo in just a moment on how to use it. But before that, I want to tell you about a second app. This app is called iNaturalist, and different than Calgary Captured, it's a global citizen science project, and it's one that you can do directly from your phone or directly from your iPad. You know, say you're out on a hike, say you're out for a walk, you know, on the weekend, and you see a really interesting new species. Maybe it's an interesting looking bug or a new plant species, or you see a coyote off in the distance from a very safe distance, of course. You can take a picture of it, upload it to iNaturalist, and the cool thing that the app does is it'll actually help you to identify that species. It will have a number of recommendations, and the more we upload to iNaturalist, the more we know about how many species we have here in our city or anywhere around the world, where they're going, and maybe what their behaviors are. And all of this data is being used for important research on how we can better conserve those species and protect biodiversity around the world. So super duper cool.
I love iNaturalist.
I love it too.
Just to iterate what you're explaining, Grace, it's so easy, it's so fun. I used it just yesterday for plants that I saw along a pathway in my own neighborhood. I was like, what is that? I got an answer within 30 minutes.
Amazing.
So cool.
Amazing. Yeah, definitely. And I mean, Sherry, you and I were used to being out in nature all the time, and we're still learning new things all the
Yes.
time. You know, it's great for being able to identify species. That's awesome. So let's get into Calgary Captured. I want to give you a quick demo now. We're actually going to practice some citizen science. So let's hop over to the Calgary Captured website. This is what it looks like. If you would like to access it, it's at this Zooniverse website, or you can Google Calgary Captured and find it there. And this is one of the photos that was uploaded. It's a trail camera photo. It was taken at nighttime. And you can see here on the right-hand side, we have a number of recommendations for species we might see in Calgary. So what we do now is we say, what do we think this species is? You know, it's definitely a larger mammal. I think it might be a deer. Sherry, what do you think?
Just from the lightness of the rear end of the creature, yeah, that's my guess, is possibly a whitetail or mule deer.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we can do here is we can click on white-tailed deer, and then we'll say, how many individuals are we seeing? We're seeing one right now, and I'm not seeing any young in this photo, so I'm going to click 0 on that, click identify, hit done, and it's as simple as that. Now, we have a very interesting second observation here. So what are we seeing in this image? Oh my goodness, it's some not so wildlife.
It's a wolf. I mean, it's not a wolf.
It's not a wolf. It's a pretty funky looking wolf. This, my friends, is a domestic dog, a not so uncommon sight that we can see in our parks right here in Calgary. And a big part of the Calgary Captured project was actually identifying that Calgarians love to go in our parks. We are all over the place, hitting the trails on the weekends, and a lot of the time we're bringing with us our furry friends like domestic dogs. So over the course of this project, there were actually, I think, 20,000 photos of off-leash dogs captured during the project. So what we can do right here,
shocking,
identify domestic dog. We see one individual, and one thing I'm noticing about the dog here in this photo is that they are not on a leash. A very interesting finding, and something that can impact our wildlife right here in our parks.
Absolutely.
All right, awesome. We're seeing, I believe, another dogtail here, but I'm going to hop back to the presentation. And what I'm going to tell you right now is some interesting findings from the research that's been done on these Calgary Captured pictures. So the Mistakis Institute, another research group right here in Calgary, took all of that citizen science information and distilled it into some really interesting facts about our parks. So firstly, they found we have a wide diversity of wildlife right here in our city parks, including white-tailed deer, mule deer, coyotes, red foxes, bobcats, skunks, moose, badgers, bears, and even cougars. Oh my goodness. It's an amazing diversity. Like I was saying, that Calgarians really love spending time in their parks. So 75% of the images that were taken were of people and their pets. And one of the most important findings that came along with this is that the presence of people in parks does in fact affect the behaviors of wildlife. So wildlife, they tended to be most active during the nighttime when it was quietest, because people are more active and in the parks with their dogs during the daytime. The wildlife that were most affected by the presence of humans and their pets were bears, cougars, and red foxes, who were almost exclusively active during the nighttime, whereas mule deer and coyotes, they didn't mind so much sharing the space during the day. So very, very cool. And as I said, tons of photos of off-leash dogs, which there's something we can learn here, because 89% of those photos were taken in on-leash dog areas. So friends, if you do ever see, if you're out walking your dog and you see an on-leash sign, it's pretty important actually to keep your dog leashed up, because that way you can keep your dog safe, keep them from maybe having to have an encounter with some of these wildlife, and making it so that these spaces are a lot friendlier for the wildlife we're sharing it with as well. So awesome. Great job following along with me as we're practicing a little bit of our citizen science. And one other thing I want to talk about is this word biodiversity. I've been using it a lot already throughout this presentation. So what I would first like to know is, what do you think biodiversity is? You know, right now in the chat, what does biodiversity mean to you? Feel free to share some answers right now. However, I am also going to give you my definition. So the simplest way to understand biodiversity is just by breaking down the word into its two pieces. Bio meaning life and diversity meaning variety. So together these things just mean the variety of life, which is a really, really good thing. You know, the more biodiversity we have, the more resilient our ecosystems can be. And we can have different types of diversity. You know, the one we're most used to thinking about is probably species diversity, the number of different wildlife species that we have in a given area, whether it's birds or mammals or insects or fish or vegetation, all the different types. But we can also have ecosystem diversity, which means the different types of habitats we have in an area, or genetic diversity, which are the individual genetic differences that we have within a population of wildlife, say within a population of woodland caribou up in the boreal. So, Sherry, do we have any thoughts on biodiversity and what it might mean to our classes?
We have several. The idea of everything outside was offered. The idea of a mishmash of organic or living things. This one's my favorite though, a stew of life.
Oh my goodness, that
Isn't
is
that
an
great?
amazing definition. I think I'm going to continue using that one for myself.
I love that.
That's awesome. So excellent job, everyone. Thank you so much for sharing your answers. By doing citizen science, we are essentially looking at what biodiversity looks like right here in our own backyard. And this is something that's really important to be tracking, especially right now as our climate is starting to change. So we're going to do an activity now that's going to help us visualize biodiversity and how it can differ between two ecosystems. So what I want you to do right now in the chat is to list 5 different biotic or abiotic ecosystem elements. So 5 biotic or abiotic things that you might find in an ecosystem. And feel free to do that in the Q&A right now. So as we're waiting, I do want to give you a quick reminder of what biotic and abiotic characteristics are. So biotic just means something that's living within our ecosystems, whereas abiotic means things that are non-living within our ecosystems. However, what if I told you if something that we consider within Western science as abiotic, like water, is actually alive? Well, that might surprise you. However, you know, there are groups like our Indigenous peoples who believe that elements like water do actually have a spirit and are considered alive. You know, how do you think we would treat water, air, rocks, minerals, or soil differently if we considered them to be alive? You know, it's important to consider that the Western way of knowing isn't the only way of knowing, and we can learn much from the cultures that are around us, including from our Indigenous neighbors and the Indigenous knowledge that they share. All right, Sherry, do we have some ecosystem elements?
We do. A ton. Everything from oxygen was listed. Great horned owls, probably inspired by your photo, Grace.
Oh my goodness.
Mountain, plants, wolf, dead creatures, algae.
Oh my goodness, amazing. Well done, everyone. These are really excellent characteristics to be having within our ecosystem. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start building an ecosystem. Here we have the sun, which is abiotic. We have some soil and water and grass, which is a biotic producer, meaning it creates and shares energy with other critters. We have decomposers like worms. We have some other plants here, trees and shrubs, and we have some buildings, which are an abiotic component. And then let me add in some other biotic components. Maybe we have some bears, we have some white-tailed deer, let's throw in some birds for good measure, and some fish, and let's say a bobcat as well. So these are some really good-looking ecosystems. However, you may notice that one ecosystem looks different than the other. Out of these two images, which of these two ecosystems do you think has greater biodiversity? The one on the right or the one on the left? It's the left ecosystem that has high biodiversity, and this is because it's what we consider an intact ecosystem. While the other image on the right would reflect more of an urban ecosystem where we have those buildings and the pavement, and it has reduced amount of vegetation and of animals that live there. So today we understand that it's really important for the health of ourselves and for the health of our environment to be able to protect biodiversity. So that's something that we're really trying to work on integrating more and more into our cities. So what are some ways that we could increase biodiversity in our cities? Feel free to put some of your own answers into the chat right now, but some ways that I can think of are maybe adding more parks, so having more habitat for our wildlife to live in, connecting some of our green spaces, and so we know animals like to move around. They often like to do it maybe through our river valleys, which act as important wildlife corridors. So the more green space we can offer in those important wildlife corridors, the easier it'll be for our wildlife to be able to migrate. We can also improve diversity in our own spaces, say by planting native plants in our yards or on our lawns. And we can also work to reduce urban sprawl. So urban sprawl is when we spread outwards and grow as a city. And one way of reducing that is instead to focus our growth upwards, building our cities taller instead of spreading out so much and taking up more habitat that surrounds Calgary. Okay, friends, so we understand how urban environments impact the overall biodiversity of an area. So now I want to play a game with you to look at how our species live in cities and the different obstacles they face in order to be able to survive. So we're going to play this super fun game. It's the Urban Ecosystem Game. And during this game, we are going to play as my friend, the black bear. And I'm going to face you with a scenario card on each screen where I give you a choice. You either get to pick from option A or option B and decide what the best choice might be for our friend the black bear to be able to survive as it's moving throughout the city. We're going to start off with 3 health points. And, if we do choices that are good for our black bear, we're going to move up the scale towards number 5. Or if there are things that are impacting our health, we might move down the scale. And if we dip below 1, that means that our black bear may not have survived its journey through the city. Okay, so let's get started. All right. You have been pushed out of your previous range by an older and larger male bear. Heading into the summer, it's prime time for you to start eating as much as possible in preparation for hibernation. And approaching an open field, you discover a crop of ripe buffalo berries. Do we think that it would be better to select option A, eat as many berries as you can, you follow the berry patch and you eat as you go, or option B, continue on looking for something else to eat? Now, I'll just give you a moment to think about that one and decide what we might like to do.
I know which direction I'd go, Grace. Easy, easy.
Easy peasy decision, huh? All right. Do we have any answers coming through the chat, Sherry?
And I was just going to say, and most people are on my team. Option A is coming up.
A. Wonderful. Eat as many berries as you go. Wonderful. Excellent selection, everyone. So the berries are delicious and plentiful. You eat until you're full and then you rest. So we're going to move over next to the suburban space and everyone gains 1 health point. Excellent job. Okay, scenario 2. You continue to travel, always looking for food. Humans are everywhere and they give you a wide berth as you walk along the sidewalk. Are we going to select next option A, stay close to the woodland and avoid human houses and sniff for food? Or option B, walk along the people's backyard fences eating fruit from their trees. All right, so this might sound like a not so common scenario here in Calgary. However, this is kind of a reality out in our more rural mountain areas, places like Canmore, where they've actually developed some important bylaws to be able to coexist with bears. Like folks in Canmore, they're actually not allowed to have any fruit trees that they're growing in their backyards to not attract the bears. They have to have bear-proof bins as well in their backyard so they can't get into the garbage. And they're not even allowed to have pumpkins during the Halloween time because they may attract the bears as well. So, Sherry, how are we feeling about our options here?
Well, you know, people and bears are led by their stomach. So lots of people are saying option B, Grace.
Option B, walk along people's backyard fences eating the fruit from their trees. Absolutely. So what happened here? Well, Government Wildlife Services find, trap, and tranquilize you after you're asleep, you're studied, and then transported outside of the city. We're going to move to the acreage square and everyone loses 1 health point. The reality, yeah, it's something that can happen sometimes when our bears enter into our cities. So after being relocated, you're drowsy and finding it difficult to find food. You are wandering along and not finding much to eat until you come across a building and you smell something delicious. Oh my goodness. Are you going to select option A, notice that it's a human building and decide to avoid it, eating the grass instead? Or option B, decide to try and find the food source near the building, finding a non-bear-proof bin, you open it and tear through the human garbage and you eat what you can. Now, this is a tricky one, isn't it? What do you think, Sherry?
You know what? We're trying to be a non-habituated bear here, Grace. So option A is coming up strongly.
Let us see. Option A. What happens? Oh my goodness. Yes, we have a smart bear who has not yet been habituated to our human habits. You go hungry and rest, no effect. Move to an off-leash space. All right. Well done, everyone. This was just a shortened version of our urban ecosystem game today, but thank you so much for participating and acting along the part 2 of what it might be like to be a bear, moving through an urban space and encountering all of these different obstacles. So, what are some of the ways that you think we could reduce these obstacles in our city? Feel free to enter it into the chat right now, and feel free to use as well some of those answers that we were talking about just before we got into the urban ecosystem game. But one of the things that we can also do in addition to those different things like adding more parks or connecting our spaces more is to use citizen science to be able to protect our friend the bear and to be able to protect biodiversity. Simply by observing it, we're collecting more information, we're finding out more about our biodiversity, and we're finding, through research, better ways to be able to manage our wildlife in these spaces and be able to coexist with them, which is absolutely amazing. So, one obstacle that we weren't presented with during our urban ecosystem game, and that's a pretty big issue right now for our urban wildlife and for biodiversity, is climate change. And it's actually starting to have an impact on our urban wildlife and how they're able to survive. So I wanted to talk about climate change for just a moment, because as I've noted, you know, biodiversity is shifting in response to it. And we have seen drastic temperature changes throughout Earth's history, not just right now, but all throughout time. You know, we've seen these changes throughout the early eras, you know, when there were still dinosaurs roaming across the Earth, big dips and changes where our temperature went higher and lower throughout time, and it continued to change. Even as mammals were evolving across the planet, we hit the Ice Age at one point. But what we're seeing right now is that our temperature, our climate is changing at a much more faster rate than it ever has throughout history. So within the past 100 years, we've seen these dramatic changes where it's changing up to 20 times faster than it was before. So you can see this sharp increase. This is our time right now where we're existing in human history and our temperature is suddenly jumping up. So scientists have found that the greenhouse gas effect is largely responsible for our climate changing on our planet. So I want to show you a quick video right now to explain what the greenhouse gas effect is.
The Earth's atmosphere is a mixture of gases. Some are known as greenhouse gases. That's because they trap heat from the sun and warm the Earth. That's good, because without greenhouse gases, our planet would freeze, and life as most of us know it would be impossible. These greenhouse gases, mainly water vapor and carbon dioxide, naturally cycle between the land and atmosphere and ocean. And over the ages, these greenhouse gases have reached a delicate balance that results in temperatures that we like a lot. It's been that way for thousands of years, until the last 150 years. That's when people began burning fossil fuels. Those fossil fuels, coal, oil, natural gas, contain carbon that's been locked away from the natural cycle for eons. But when we burn them, that carbon joins with oxygen to make carbon dioxide that goes into the atmosphere. It throws the natural balance out of whack. The more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the more heat that is trapped, and the warmer it gets. And the warmer it gets, the more the climate changes, and the higher the ocean will rise. The more we learn about carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, the better we can deal with the changes caused by global warming, because good planets are hard to find.
All right, that was an awesome explanation of how the greenhouse gas, of how the greenhouse gas effect works. So you might be thinking, why now? Why are we talking about this? Which is a really fair question. Why I'm here today talking to you about climate change is that it's already showing its face all around the world with some of its really nasty impacts, which are happening here to us, even in Calgary. Maybe we've seen it through the 2013 floods that happened here in the city, and definitely through the wildfires that have become more and more common every summer through BC and Alberta as well. And you guys, well, you're our future citizens who are going to be making big decisions about our climate and how we act on it. And you absolutely have the power to control what your future is going to look like. So the city of Calgary released this awesome plan, this climate strategy back in 2018, climate resilience strategy, which means that we're trying to make Calgary strong enough to be able to fight against the climate crisis. And there are lots of different ways that we're working to do this, whether it's reducing the amount of electricity used by turning off the lights, turning down the temperature in your home, air drying your clothes, walking more places, not using your car quite so much, but also remembering to use citizen science. You can absolutely take climate action just by participating in the nature that's around you, using those important observations and asking lots of important questions about what we can do to help nature and looking just at the nature around us. So what I would like you to do now, friends, just as we're wrapping up, is to make a pledge. Now, again, I know that I can't see you, but I'm going to invite you to do this activity with me right now. I would like you to raise your right hand, put your other hand on your heart, and say, I pledge to contribute to citizen science by the end of June. Now, if you do that, that would be absolutely wonderful. And if you aren't able to do anything more than just getting outside, then that is absolutely enough just to go outside and enjoy nature and hopefully make a couple observations along the way, maybe using that iNaturalist app. So friends, thank you so much for joining us today for our program. Congratulations on becoming a citizen science, and we hope you enjoyed it and we hope you learned something new. So I know we're short on time here. It's 2 o'clock right now. Feel free to enter any questions you have into the chat. We will be able to see them even after this webinar ends. And we also have a quick survey for you as well, if you'd like to let us know what you thought about today's program so that we can keep improving it into the future. So thank you again, everyone. Thank you to the city and to Lindsay for having us for this session. And happy Mayor's Expo, and we'll see you next year. Thanks, everyone. Now back to you.